I'm going to call the meeting to order and welcome everyone to our Civic Works Committee meeting. We had a couple of regrets and illness today, so we are operating with a small committee. There are 3 of us, and we will be our normal efficient selves. On the consent items, I need to pull 2.4 as I have a conflict, but I'll look to the committee to see if there's any other ones you would like pulled or just comments on.
I want to comment on 2.1. I'd like to comment on 2.2.
Okay, and are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest besides mine? Okay, so I'm going to disclose pecuniary interest on item 2.4. At this point, item 2.4. My spouse is employed by Union Gas, and there's implications on that item. So we'll put 2.1 to 2.5 except for 2.4 on, and I'll go to Councillor Usher first. Perhaps Councillor Usher, I'm sorry, I did forget. There were some comments from staff on one of the items. Maybe I'll do that first while you locate yours. On item 2.1, the annual warranted sidewalk program, Mr. Soldo, you had some comments on that?
Yes, thank you to the chair, to the committee. I just want to point out on page 4, we've listed off projects which are being done in conjunction with other infrastructural renewal work and where sidewalks are done as part of that. There is one project listed here, Chippendale Crescent from King Edward Avenue to the existing sidewalk at the school. That project was designed and ready to be tendered, but due to the lack of CWWF funding, that will be deferred to a future date, so it will not be occurring this year.
Okay, thank you very much. And do we need to do any changes to the recommendation then with that change?
Through the chair to the committee, given that we don't actually highlight the sidewalks listed in the recommendation itself, if we just make a note to strike out Chippendale Crescent, I think that would be appropriate.
Okay, we'll make that note. I have Councillor Usher and then Hubert. I was doing kind of comments on all of them because then I have Councillor Hopkins as well.
Okay.
Do you guys want to go one by one instead?
I don't care.
Okay, why don't we go with Usher first?
So we're dealing with my 2.2, or we're still on 2.1? No, 2.1. Okay. So my big question is, it's really to do with the traffic situation and the detour. It looks like a very long detour. And we get a lot of complaints about this. I know that this is sort of on the outskirts of the city, but there's a lot of trucks and other vehicles that travel that area that aren't necessarily having their business in that area. And I just wonder how we're going to inform them before the time so that they could take the detour. I think that you got the gist of my question.
Thank you to the chair, to the councillor. I'm going to refer to page 13. Lambeth is very much an isolated area where we don't have a lot of roadways to allow for that through traffic. And unfortunately, given the depth of the excavations required for the sewers in this area, we do have to restrict traffic to the one direction. In terms of the detour signage and informing the longer distance trucks, we'll have to provide that signage on Main Street further to the west so that to ensure that people are taking those longer detours. We'll utilize our normal process for notification, but also we'll have to do that advanced signage as you enter the city coming from the west. I'll look to Mr. McCray to provide any additional comments that he sees fit.
As I think Mr. Soldo covered the issue reasonably well, we broadcast information regarding impacts like this as broadly as possible. Internet signage in advance, typically 2 weeks in advance of the construction starting, is the most effective way. For something like this, we'll also likely engage social media channels.
And I do respect that. I read the whole report. I just want you to know that, and I do appreciate where the staff is coming from. And, you know, my big concern was really not the people who use it on a regular basis. Oh, sorry, not the people who have their business in the area, but people who come from afar and they're passing through that route. But I think that the staff will do their best from what I'm hearing here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And what I think I'm going to do, I know Councillor Hopkins wants to respond to that, and I know on 2.1, there's going to be comments as well. So what I'd like to do is finish up 2.2. We'll let Councillor Hopkins respond to that. I'll then go to Councillor Hubert for your item, and hopefully we can do them all together.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for recognizing me. And I know the community is looking forward with this massive infrastructure that is going to be taking place. And I assume that timelines are still going to, are in place for starting at the end of this month and hopefully completing it around November at the end of this year. And I know, like Byron, Lambeth has not too many alternatives when it comes to detours. And this construction on Main Street is going to create a lot of congestion and especially for the businesses. I've heard about the concerns, and I know everyone's is getting together, trying to communicate, and I think that's what my job as a councillor in that area is going to be, how we communicate, how we can expect and be notifying the community earlier, as sooner than later is usually the best way to go forward. And I know we will be putting in traffic calming because the detours will be going through the community, and that again is going to create another concern. So I guess through the chair to staff, I just want to stress, and if the timelines are still in place for getting the information out to the community sooner than later. So just timelines and confirmation of communication.
Ms. Scher or Mr. McCray?
With the approval of the tender award, we will immediately be beginning communications with the contractor that has been successful here, and then follow that up with proactive communications to the neighborhoods. That typically involves a letter that provides more detail to the residents in the immediately affected area, and then some of the broader communications, like I mentioned earlier, that help the greater neighborhood and the broader city to understand what's about to happen.
Do a follow-up to that. I'm not sure if the Lambeth Library is on your list, but that is a great resource. The community center there in Lambeth is also an opportunity, I think, to even post notices that residents can see as they visit the community center and the library.
Okay, anything else on 2.2? Okay, Councillor Hubert, your item?
Okay, this is on 2.1, my favorite subject, warranted sidewalks. One question through you, Madam Chair, is I thought in the budget we had increased the budget amount far more than $100,000 a year, and I could be incorrect, but I thought we had a lot more money is set aside in the 4-year budget on an annual basis for it. Can you help me out, or was that a one-time thing? Or
Mr. Soldo?
Thank you to the chair, to Councillor. You are correct. On an annual basis, the amount of money was increased I believe it was to 400,000. The reason that we have less money this year is, you may recall back in 2017, as part of the PTIF Phase 1 funding allocation, staff at that point moved forward money from future years to do more of the work underneath PTIF, and thereby being able to utilize the 50% funding from the federal government. So last year's program was actually $2 million. So we advanced quite a bit of future dollars forward to utilize that 50% dollar funding, and that's why we have a reduced amount this year.
So when would it go back to 400 next year? In 19, or how many years do we advance to get up to the threshold?
Through the chair to the councillor, I believe it's next year, but I'm going to ask Mr. McCready to confirm.
Yes, through the chair, it was only the 2018 budget allocation that was predominantly moved forward to double up the PTIF funding. So in 2019, it'll be back to the full budget allocation for the program.
Okay, and thank you. And just since this will be probably my last kick at the can on this one, the item Crampston Crescent, Valletta Street to Adavan is really interesting because Crampston is it has a back entrance off of Riverside Public School, and there was some communication last year about it warrants and not warranted and some of that sort of stuff. But this year we are doing a sidewalk on Adavan, which runs from Valletta down to North Mile to connect it with the sidewalks in that area. So, you know, frankly, I'm not sure I would prioritize Crampston. I'm not sure how it ends up with a 70, frankly. Probably the proximity to the school is probably kicking it up pretty good, but I see real value in the Cranbrook to Longwood, anything that has, quite frankly, an A beside it in terms of arterial. I'm always surprised that we don't have sidewalks in it, and those ones would be the ones that I'd be putting up there as a high priority. So thanks. I'm glad to hear that it'll be back up and into bigger money next year. Thank you very much. Happy to move.
Yeah, I think I got ahead of myself a little bit there, Deputy Mayor Hubert, with moving it all together. So I think Councillor Hopkins wanted to speak on 2.1, and I do want to draw committee's attention to the added agenda. There's an added communication from Kay Buchanan in regards to 2.1. So I'll go to Councillor Hopkins first.
Thank you again, Madam Chair, for recognizing me, and I know the resident is here with us too regarding his communication, and it just really shows the concerns that we have in the Byron Southwood Public School area. And this time last year, I was at committee asking the committee to pull Regis Avenue in place to a future time, and because of the numerous concerns coming out of the installation of this sidewalk on Regis Place and Avenue. And I want to thank the committee for doing so, because the community was able to start their conversations with the school as to what the problems were in the area. And I'd like to give the committee just an update as to what the community has been doing this past year. So, last year, we were going through the process of constructing Byron Baseline, which sort of fronts or backs onto Byron Southwood. And staff and the Board of Education took an opportunity to see if anything could be done during that construction to allow for some extra parking spaces. And unfortunately, there was probably 3 at the most that would be accommodated, and the costs were quite prohibitive. So the Board of Education looked at addressing access from Bowler Road. There's a large area fronting off of Bowler Road and adjoining the schoolyard to look at extra parking. And the board is coming up with a design right now of 10 spots, along with a sidewalk and access off Ebola Road to and from, where people can come in and drop off. So it would allow for extra parking, which is really needed in that school. There is a great concern for parking, because a lot of parents park along Regis Place and Avenue, and of course, it's a cul-de-sac, and there's no flow-through traffic there, and everything gets quite congested, and it is a safety concern. So hopefully the board will be coming through with a site plan. Hopefully this summer, something can get started, and these extra spots could be in place in September. So the other thing that happened was I held a community meeting last October, had about 25 to 30 people attend. And then, of course, that's not including staff. There was quite a few staff people on hand to explain the sidewalk warranty program, to take questions and answer concerns. And the concerns came out that there was a need for more sidewalks in that area, and I'm really pleased to see they are on this list. If you look at Jellicoe Crescent, Wayne Road, Blake Street, as well as Regis Place and Avenue, as well as Collingwood Avenue, Wayne Road, and Belvedere. And there was another request to have Belvedere, and I think it goes down to Blake, to have that road assessed, because there's 10 new families with young families that are moving into that area that are looking for sidewalks too. So I'm hoping to see that come on the list once that evaluation is being done. But it has been a really good conversation. And one thing I've learned is the importance of, when we put in sidewalks, that we are connecting and that we are putting them in places where they are needed. And I know I don't want to get into yes over here and no over there, but it is about prioritizing, and that is the conversation that this community had. Where is it important? And all these streets still remain on the list. I do have a couple questions, so that's my update. The first question I have, through Madam Chair, to staff is just understanding these three projects and the priority, what gave them the priority to go ahead this year. And the second question I have is the expected or the realistic timelines of implementing all these sidewalks that are on the list. So if I can leave that with staff.
Ms. Scher or Mr. Soldo?
Thank you to the chair, to the councillor. In terms of the first question, I'm assuming you're referring to the three projects being Commissioners Chippendale and Cavendish? Okay, thank you. In terms of these projects, how they were looked at, the two of those projects, the one of which we are no longer doing this, as I mentioned earlier, those are coordinated with other infrastructure renewal. So underground water, wastewater, storm, sewers that are being done. So while we're in the area, we take a complete streets approach to those projects, and we put the sidewalks in there, especially if they're on our list. Commissioners Road was looked at as well from our various criteria in terms of how it provides for connectivity, how it relates to transit. I would say when you look at Appendix A, all those projects are looked at on a yearly basis. We look at them from a cost perspective, how much funding that we have, and then are these projects being coordinated with other infrastructure renewal? So I could go down this list and say Warncliffe, Windermere, those are already projects that we have planned in the longer term in our capital budget, so we don't do them as a standalone. We try to do them always as a coordinated list. In terms of the projects that are identified around the Byron Southwood post-secondary school, there's some great conversations that have been had with the community there. And, we've heard from that community that they're trying to deal with the traffic problems. So the school dealing with the parking is a good first step. And really, the best way to discourage or to alleviate those traffic problems is to ensure that we have sidewalks that go to that school so children can actually walk and don't need to be driven there. In that area in particular, given the number of streets that we have in the warranted sidewalk program, the best approach there really would be to create a neighborhood sidewalk plan, and not just this street or that street, come up with a plan for all the sidewalks in that area, look at them from an engineering perspective to see if they're actually implementable in terms of the grades, the sidewalks, and the trees, and then come back potentially to council and provide a full listing of exactly what those connections are going to be and have that consultation with the community. So that is what we're proposing in this area, is come up with more of a neighborhood sidewalk plan, and that could be looked at to be scheduled to be implemented at a future date then.
Thank you for that. That's been very helpful. Just as a quick question to follow up with the neighborhood sidewalk plan, who initiates it? So would staff come back with a report requesting it and then it goes out to the community, or does the community come forward requesting it?
Mr. Soto?
What we're proposing is that staff comes up with a draft of the plan, and then we can have that consultation. We really want to take into account all the engineering constraints we potentially have out there and determine the proper pedestrian routes in terms of where the pedestrians will be crossing at stop signs, PXOs, and things like that. So that is something we'll come back to council with.
I look forward to that. Thank you very much.
Okay, committee, is there other comments on 2.1? Councillor Usher?
Thank you, Madam Chair. When it comes to these warranted sidewalks, I've been relatively silent because in my initial years here, I used to fight for them very hard. But since we came up with this plan, I left it to staff because I feel that they do a really good job in prioritize them. However, over the past 7 days, mostly over the weekend, I've had some calls, and Councillor Hubert really brought it to my attention when he said that last kick at the cat. It's also my last kick at the cat, so I'm going to have to. I'm going to have to do yes. I've always advocated for sidewalk along Wellington Road, and I think the staff has done a good job with providing some along there, but they still leave this little piece that people from the schools and the northeast part of that intersection of Wellington and Bradley still go across to try to get to White Oak, sometimes to catch the bus, sometimes to do shopping, sometimes they park there, whatever. And I really do think that the sidewalk on Wellington Road from Bradley to White Oaks Mall needs some attention. It's a little piece. I know it's 275 meters, according to this information, but it's a very required piece of sidewalk. And I didn't say anything because I leave it to staff, but I don't want to not say something and then it's not done for another 10 years. Otherwise, I'll have to come back and campaign again for another term as city council. And I would like not to do that. So I want, it's supposed to be funny. You're supposed to laugh at that. So I just wanted just briefly if staff could just comment on that strip for me.
Mr. Soldo, can you help ease Councillor Usher into retirement by giving him some assurances as to Wellington Road?
I'll provide an answer, but I'm not sure I can ease anything. In terms of Wellington, we staff fully agrees that there needs to be an enhanced pedestrian facilities on there, and that's really a great byproduct of the BRT program, because with running in BRT along Wellington Street down there, we're going to have much more enhanced boulevard treatments all along that section. And on both sides of Wellington Street, once it's reconstructed as part of the BRT program, there's going to be wider sidewalks, all those connections. There will be no missing sidewalks. So the piece that you're looking for in particular is programmed to be part of the BRT implementation, and it will also go hand in hand with the multi-use pathway that's going to be run along the east side of Wellington between Commissioners down to Southdale. So all along that corridor, a true benefit of BRT is allowing us to enhance the pedestrian experience along those corridors, and that will be implemented as part of that project.
perfect timing. I'm having a meeting with the White Oaks folks tomorrow on the LTC and some of the staff here planning. And I'm sure that this will come up. At least if they don't bring it up, I will. So thanks very much. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Councillor Usher. So what I'm going to recommend is we dispense of 2.1 first, and what we need to do is endorse the report striking Chippendale. We have some language, I think, in terms of a school strategy for Byron Southwold school area, and we need to receive the communication from Kay Buchanan. So I've asked the clerk to prepare that motion, and I'll get it a mover and a seconder. I'm going to go with Hubert and then Usher, and we'll flip it next time. It should be on screen to vote. If you want to review the motion, just use that down arrow at the top.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 3-0.
My suggestion for the next is that we do 2-2, 2-3, and 2-5 together. We'll go moved by Usher, seconded by Hubert. And are there any further comments on those ones? No, we can put that up on the screen.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 3-0.
I'm going to give the chair to Deputy Mayor Hubert to move the next item.
Okay, the next item is 2.4. I'll look for a mover.
I'll move it. I have a
Okay, and
question
I will
now.
second it.
I have a question on it.
And you have a question, go ahead and ask the question.
Ready? Okay.
You can't move it. Go ahead, Councillor.
Me?
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Presiding Officer. I really appreciate this report. And I respect everything that staff is doing here. But I'm a little disappointed, and maybe staff could help me feel a little bit better about this. We put in for, I'm looking at the discussion, and I'm looking at the outcome, the different projects that we put in a bid for, or I should say, looking for funding. And we got two small, relatively small ones. And I say relatively small ones because they're really second size, mid-size in comparison to what's on the sheet. And the big one we didn't get anything for. Is there no, the ministry didn't have any room for us to just fund part of it rather than the whole? I'm talking mostly about from the landfill gas portion. That's the one I'm focusing on here for this item.
Through the chair, we're lucky we were able to get into quite good dialogue with the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change on this particular project. And one of the key things that they pointed out, this particular funding program required that the environmental attributes, which were a key part of this particular project, had to be retained in Ontario. And this particular project, to succeed, the renewable natural gas project, to succeed in Ontario, could not qualify for the higher premiums being paid for renewable natural gas in a location like California. So we discussed that with them, and the reason California is paying a higher premium right now is that the rules down there are really incentive-based. We're trying to capture renewable natural gas to displace a portion of natural gas is in high demand in California. It's also in growing demand in Quebec, and right now here in Ontario, that program has not evolved to a point where a premium is being paid. So at this point in time, as nice as it was that we would have been able to get half of the project capital costs paid for under this scenario, this particular project would have been a financial problem for the city, because we would have had to charge, we would only been allowed to be paid $4.3 per gigajoule of energy from this particular project, where the rate would require substantially higher than that, somewhere between $16 and $25 per gigajoule. So we had those conversations with the ministry. They understood the situation London was in. They also pointed out to us that there's a separate program out there, in part funded by cap and trade dollars, that is meant to prop up the renewable natural gas marketplace. And so that is something that we are going to continue to pursue and is subject of ongoing discussions with Union Gas right now.
Thank you very much for that explanation. I really appreciate that. So is it possible that we might qualify for the other program?
Through the chair, these are discussions that are ongoing right now with Union Gas. They do have a request proposal that is a public document that is out right now in Ontario, and municipalities in the private sector and various renewable natural gas developers are looking at right now. We are aware that there are a number of changes coming down the pipe in Ontario and at the federal government level. So the whole notion of renewable natural gas will be something that will be, I think, at the forefront of further discussions here in London and elsewhere in Canada, as that industry is looking at ways to make their fuel further meet green requirements, both in Ontario, Canada, and across North America.
Quick follow-up, Mr. Stanford. I'm looking at item number 4, then wastewater treatment plant upgrades. That's a different thing from the W12 site. And I noticed that we weren't successful in that round either. Is there any room or any other program that we might be successful to get something there for some of the work that we are doing with gases at the waste treatment plant?
Through the chair, it's a shame Scott Mathers is not here, because he would tell you about how successful they have been with a number of areas, and perhaps Ms. Scheer can comment on that further. But these were sort of, let's call them the leftovers that hadn't received funding. And so basically we grouped them together. They were multiple projects put into the package. The province looked at them and provided no further comment. At this stage, we're assuming they're out of the running. We haven't heard that officially. There wasn't that dialogue on these items. There is going to be another round of cap and trade dollars made available to municipalities, but I think there's still been a lot of good news to date.
Just to add to Mr. Stanford's response, we are also considering whether or not these projects may be eligible for things like the Green Infrastructure Fund announcement that has been recently made. So we're not giving up on things like some of our energy efficiency programs at primarily at the Greenway wastewater treatment plant, but we are going to be looking at pursuing alternative funding.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you. I wanted to address the compressed natural gas for our vehicles. I was contacted by one of our retired bus drivers who was describing to me how London Transit wanted to move in this direction. Previously, they bought a number of buses, and they actually built the first ever in North America indoor fueling station. And in the end, they got rid of all the buses because they simply mechanically they couldn't tune them well enough. They had to send them to Toronto, had them converted back to diesel. Quite a few $1 million was wasted in that project, and I guess the question is what's changed. So I'm not sure that about the natural gas. I think we also have a challenge in that, although it's competitive now, it may be de-incentivized by some green strategies, and so I'll look for staff's comments on that through the chair.
Mr. Stanford, your comment on those two items?
Through the chair, very important comments, and we've heard them here before at Civic Works, and they're actually part of our business case. And as you know, the first step of that particular project, funded by the province, 50%, will be to complete our business case and come back to you in about 3 months. What occurred with London Transit Commission is probably about 15 years ago now, maybe even 20, and we will obtain further information on that and make sure that that is all available, because I'll use the word haunt. Right now, that is a word that haunts us, because at a point in time, it is unfortunate, but it did not work out. Things have changed, and we will have to convince you that things have changed. And new information, like all technologies, go through periods of time when bugs have to be worked out. There are situations now where compressed natural gas are widely used in a number of vehicles, in particular garbage trucks, and have been for at least now 5 years, without any issues. So that is the information that's important, but it is always important to recognize the past challenges, because as a public body, those that were there, they occurred, and we have to acknowledge that and address that. But I'd like to think our business case will come forward with the correct information to suggest highly that times have changed.
All right, thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have the 100% answer, but I was on London Transit at the time, and I just want to clear something up so that it doesn't go out. The situation with London Transit at the time had little to do with the natural gas. It had to do with the bus. The buses were very, very expensive to maintain, very expensive to repair, and they were very expensive buses. And there were 5 of those buses that we started with, and we scrapped them at that point in time. Since then, there is one city that is using natural gas buses, but since then, most of the transit buses have gone on to electrical bus system. Whatever we're hearing now, I got pretty much the same call. It's to do with the garbage trucks utilizing that, and there are other vehicles that will be using natural gas. But I just want to make it that it was, we stopped the natural gas buses because of the buses themselves. It was just too expensive to operate. Thank you. And I'm sure that London Transit will give a much better answer than I would, but you'll find it's on par with what I just said. Thanks.
Technology is interesting because sometimes we try something and it doesn't work, not because it's wrong, but because it's ahead of its time. I would remind people that in 2008, Apple came out with this thing that we call the iPhone, and it literally revolutionized the way we communicate today. And it's remarkable that that was only 10 years ago. So before that, all of us were running around with Palm Pilots and and we all would say, gee, it would be great if my Palm Pilot could be my cell phone at the same time. So, technology is interesting. You have to take it with some analysis, but also not curse the future with what might have been a failure of the past. How's that?
Thanks. I'm looking forward to the thorium iPhone 39. You take it home and put it in the dock. It charges your house and incinerates your garbage. So we'll cover, kill 2 birds with 1 stone.
Thanks, Counselor. I'm going to call the question on this one. I think Counselor Usher is moving it. Yeah, great. We'll also walk your dog.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 2-0 with 1 abstain.
I believe you gave me back the chair, Deputy Mayor. You just didn't do it on the mic, so I will take it back, and I will go to item 4.1, which is a delegation request from M. Marketon regarding paratransit. Go ahead.
Madam Chair, all I have is request for delegation. I don't have any, is there something I'm missing here?
No, it's a miss.
Is it a miss? I'm sorry.
So I'll give you a moment to review that. Yep, go ahead, Councillor Usher.
Thank you. With respect to 4.1, I don't have a problem with allowing this person to come here. I wondered if the appropriate place for them to go to was not LTC, because LTC is the one who administer the paratransit. And I would like to lead them to LTC first. I'm just wondering, because they talk about meeting of April the 9th, and we don't have a meeting on April the 9th. So I'm just wondering if they anticipated LTC. I don't know if LTC has a meeting on April the 9th either. But I'd like to find out if they want to come here or they want to go to the LTC, because I think LTC should be the place to start.
Councillor Usher, I think great minds may think alike. I spoke with the clerk a fair amount about this prior to today's meeting, and we did have some back and forth with the delegate. As you know, it's always my preference to invite delegates to come and speak to committee. However, in this case, I did feel that LTC was the best first stop. And so I asked the clerk to prepare a motion, which I'll ask her to put up, which would indicate a connection to the LTC, and then pending that, if there's still unresolved issues, an opportunity to come back and speak to committee. So if you'll take a look at the motion that will be up in a moment and see if you agree with that, I'll need someone to move and second it. And I'll read it out for camera and anyone that can't read from where you're sitting, that the following actions be taken with requested delegation request by M. Marketon. A, London Transit Commission be requested to make contact with M. Marketon with respect to her issues with paratransit. B, the request for delegation status be approved for a future meeting of CWC if required, it being noted that the committee secretary will follow up with respect to this matter. So that allows the LTC to touch base with the delegate, and if they'd still like to come back, we could go ahead and do that. So if that's the committee's will, I'll need someone to move and second it.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 3-0.
Okay, for 4.2, there was not a request for delegation status, but I think it was an opportunity for the committee to read the letter. So if I can get a receipt, Deputy Mayor.
Well, I'll certainly move receipt, and I'd like to refer it to the Cycling Advisory Committee. I think that's where they should weigh in on it. This is a significant issue in terms of cycling and education of cyclists in terms of what's appropriate. I can't tell you how many times I've been looking one way, not expecting a cyclist to be coming the wrong way on a sidewalk, or, you know, and so it's, I think it's something the cycling advisory group should have a look at.
Okay, so you would like it to refer to them just for review?
For their review and comment, yeah.
Okay. Would you second that, Councillor Usher? Perfect.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 3-0.
Okay, next is the deferred matters list. Get a motion to receive unless there's any changes or amendments. Moved by Deputy Mayor Hubert, seconded by Councillor Usher.
Yeah.
Motion to receive, thank you.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 3-0.
Okay, and prior to going into confidential session, as you can see, there's a request for a proposal process being conducted by Union Gas. Due to my spouse's employment in the energy sector, I'm going to declare pecuniary interest on that item. I don't mind doing the vote to have people move into closed session, and then you'll complete the meeting in closed session. Adjourn from closed session.
Yeah.
Okay, so can I get a motion to go into closed session? Deputy Mayor, okay. Moved by Usher, seconded by Hubert.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 3-0.
So we'll resume across the hall in committee room 3 and in closed session. Thank you very much, and we'll adjourn from that room as well.